Hey all, this is Redditosker. I received an early review copy of Space Marine 2. But this video isn't a review of the game, it's a impressions video. Because while I did manage to complete the story, my time with operations was limited, and there was only a couple of times where there was another player present. For the PvP I wasn't able to get a match at all, since the people that are playing were only the people like me that had review codes. So it wouldn't be fair to give the game a proper review, since the operations and the PvP are such a big part of the game. That might be something I do down the line, but for now this is going to be a general impressions video focusing on the gameplay, the story, and a small amount on the operations. And my general impression is that it's fun. The environments are very detailed and pretty, the number of Tyranids that they can show in the distance is pretty impressive, and it helps sell you on the fantasy that this is a planet-wide invasion. As for the gameplay, I'm not going to waste a lot of time describing it. It is exactly what you're seeing on screen. It's exactly how it looks on trailers. It's fun, it's visceral, it looks cool, and it feels cool to do. It's like a better, more polished version of Space Marine 1's with a higher emphasis on parrying and dodging. Let's talk about the parry, actually. A lot of people that got access to previews before talked about this parry and didn't really like it. They thought it was finicky. I do like the parry, but I can see why someone might not. The way it works is monsters will be able to do different types of attacks. If they have a blue indicator, you can parry them. If they have an orange indicator, you can't parry them and you need to dodge it. In either case, parrying or dodging at the right time will give you the opportunity to counter with your pistol, and that will do a good bit of damage. You can parry all of the melee attacks except for the big orange ones, even if it doesn't have the parry indicator. So if you see a Tyranid or something swinging at you, you can parry it. But doing the parry when the indicator isn't present doesn't guarantee you the opportunity to counter with your pistol, and in fact it might not even slow down the enemy. They won't get staggered and they will continue attacking. However, if you keep parrying in succession, the enemy will eventually get stunned and give you the opportunity to counter with the pistol shot. The reason I think a lot of the previewers thought it was finicky and didn't like it is that it's kind of hard to do when you are focusing on multiple enemies, small and large, and their normal melee attacks don't have any indicators. You just have to watch their animations and parry at that point. But I think it's pretty fun, and I'm pretty sure you can do it even with bosses. Attacks that don't have the red indicator that means you can't parry them, and doing that will lead to being able to counter with an execution shot. The campaign can be played by yourself, with the AI taking over the two other spots. But there's a lot about it that makes me think I would have preferred playing with others. For example, there's a lot of different melee and ranged weapons that are more suitable for dealing with, either single big targets or large groups. But unlike in Space Marine 1, you can't have a big arsenal. You can only have one primary, one pistol, and one melee weapon. I think the reason for this change is to make going through the campaign with friends more interesting. Limiting your options and not letting you take more than one type of gun could spur you to coordinate with your friend and choose different loadouts, so that each of you is better suited at dealing with different things. I think that's intended, and you can tell that by how they set up operations. In operations, the different classes have access to different guns, and you can't double up on classes in operations. Each person has to have a different one. I think this philosophy has bled into the campaign for co-op reasons, and the result will be that it will just be more fun with friends. Now let's talk about some complaints. There's a surprisingly low amount of enemy variety. They might technically be different. I'm not versed in 40k lore, but from just their appearance they look the same. 90% of the time you're going to be fighting small Tyranids that attack you in melee, those same small Tyranids that shoot you with guns, and accompanying them will be these medium-sized Tyranid warriors. The warriors will have swords or whips or guns, but from their appearance they seem to be the same unit, and the tactics you use to beat them don't seem to change very much. There are other Tyranids, like the bosses. The Lictor is a stealth unit that starts off as a boss and then becomes a normal enemy. There's the Raveners, which slither around, burrow underground, and ambush you. And there's the floating ones that power up the Tyranids nearby. These do show up, but they're much less prominent. I don't think I'm exaggerating when I say that 90% or more of what you're killing are the warriors and the smaller units. One thing that's disappointing is that you don't actually get to fight the gargoyles. The flying units that you see everywhere are mostly there just for show. The only time you engage with them is when they attack something you're protecting and you're shooting them off of that thing. They don't attack you from the sky. They don't dive rush you. They don't do anything. And I assume that the reason for that is that they just couldn't figure out how to make a fight like that interesting. Tyranids are kind of boring as a faction, if I'm being honest. You know, they don't talk, they don't have motivations other than to eat. They're a cool enemy to fight, but I think I enjoyed my time in Space Marine 1 more when fighting the orcs. Orcs talk, they have that accent, they are more charming, and their different types are clearly distinguishable. My problem with the Tyranids is that they only have 2 types of basic enemies, and they look very similar. I would have preferred if they were more like the orcs, where they have a wider variety of basic enemy types, because the basic enemy types are the ones that you fight the most. Let's move on to the story. I'm not going to spoil anything, this is a spoiler-free video, but without saying much, I think the story is absolutely okay. I think it's a distinct improvement from Space Marine 1. The pacing is okay throughout the whole experience. The final boss was surprisingly cinematic and cool. And it ended in a very interesting cliffhanger, which suggests that there will probably be a sequel or some DLC down the line to expand the story. And it was good enough that if there is DLC, I'll definitely be purchasing it. At the end of the day, though, it wouldn't be the reason why I recommend Space Marine 2 to someone, if they were interested in a good story. The set pieces, the scale, and the atmosphere are much better than the actual narrative. The story's main utility is just to move you from one of those set pieces to another. Alright, let's talk about the operations, because the operations are actually very interesting. Operations are the PvE co-op mode. In this mode, you're restricted to one of 6 classes. These classes will have unique abilities, and they will also have their loadouts restricted. For example, the Heavy class creates a bubble shield in front of himself that blocks all ranged damage. It's the only class that can use heavy weapons, but can't use melee weapons at all. The Bulwark class will put a banner that restores armor continuously if you're sticking around it. He has access to a shield that can block melee and ranged attacks when he's holding it up or when he's running. He's the only class that can use the Power Sword, but he loses access to any primary weapon at all. The only ranged options he has are his pistols. All the classes work this way by having specializations and trade-offs. When playing operations, you can play completely offline, but if you bring friends, you can't take the same class into the operation. You each have to be a different type of Space Marine. The operations are chronological story missions with objectives. The first 5, I believe, show what the other squad of Space Marines was doing while Titus was doing the story mode campaign. A lot of the events happen in parallel, and during the main campaign you hear Titus get reports on how their operations are going. The missions are fairly lengthy, taking around half an hour or more to complete. It reminds me a little bit of Vermintide 2. If I'm remembering right, Vermintide 2 had chronological mission objectives, and each one was self-contained, but they were working towards a larger goal. I think that the Space Marines have individual personalities, so if you're playing as the Heavy class, it's a person. The Marines will chatter throughout the mission and will call each other by name, and I think the guy that's the Heavy class will always be the guy that's in the Heavy class. I don't think that you can change your appearance under your helmet. One of the things I liked about Vermintide 2 is that the characters were set characters with their own personalities and they chattered with each other. I was hoping that that would happen here, and it does seem to, but they're Space Marines, and they really only have Space Marine things to say to each other. So even if they do have individual personalities tied to their classes, I haven't heard anything that's very interesting. They're just noble Space Marines, they don't have anything really interesting to say. Now, the cool thing about the operations is that apart from being long and varied, they're pretty hard on anything other than the easiest difficulty. And the reason for this is because you level up. As you level up, you can unlock more perks and choose a build. You can't equip all perks at once. The same goes for your weapons. Your weapons get upgraded, and they don't just get stronger. You can upgrade them in different ways. And even apart from upgrading, there are perks that you can have each weapon unlock. And so with each class being able to select different perks, you can build them and their weapons and their loadouts in different ways to specialize in different things, even in the same class. And given how difficult the missions are in the higher difficulty levels, it would be a good idea to get these perks and power-ups and weapon upgrades before challenging these missions on the harder difficulties. In fact, there are recommendations on the difficulty selection as to what level you should be before you attempt it. I only got to try the operations in PvE, but even from what I played, it was super fun. The higher difficulties really seem like a challenge. and I can easily see myself having a lot of fun with a group of friends doing them. There seems to be a lengthy amount of things to unlock, not just upgrades and perks, but also a lot of cosmetic options to customize your Space Marine however you like. I've heard hopes and clamoring from the community that they expand on this PvE mission system considerably post-launch, almost like a live service thing. And they released their Year 1 plan, which suggests they are doing something like that. By the end of the year, they intend to include a new PvE mission, a new weapon, a new enemy, whatever that means, a harder difficulty, and then sometime next year they're going to add more PvE mission, new PvP game mode, new PvP arenas, another new enemy, more PvE prestige ranks, battle barge expansion, and then finally, later on, they're going to have a new horde mode, another new enemy, another new weapon. And all of these gameplay additions seem to be free for everyone. They're also, alongside of that, adding a season pass that gets you new cosmetics every time one of these content drops. And this sounds really great. I don't know if the PvP and the PvE are going to have the longevity, especially since right now they only have 6 missions. I don't know if they're going to be able to catch people's long-term attention. But they are really fun. The missions are fun, they're difficult, the progression system is well thought out, the build-making potential is there. I think I'll have more to say on it before the end of the year when they drop their new PvE missions, their new difficulty, and the new enemy that they're talking about. Those content drops will make it more clear where they're going with it, and by then I'll have played the operations and the PvP mode enough to have a better opinion on both. Anyway, that's the end of this video. As always, thank you very much for watching.